showed her the picture. She said, "Oh my gosh, that really is a garden," you know. Um, so then she understood why it takes me sometimes 2 hours to pull weeds.
Yeah.
Because she has a tiny little garden and it takes 20 minutes to pull
Right.
her weeds.
Yeah.
And anyway, it was, she and I had such a good time talking to each other. I actually followed a different doctor through that vacation than he left. So I thanked him and I told him to this place.
Oh, we
Also,
did. The doctor from, oh, so the doctor moved around?
yeah,
So he
and
moved
then
around,
he
yeah.
went to Annapolis. I was calling him to Annapolis. Then he went to Timonium. Then Lutherville. That's a good question because I really liked him. I really loved him. But then,
Yeah.
so I stayed with the music practitioner. Hello. Can I Politics and Prose bookstore? My name's Elisa. I'm on the events team here at Politics and Prose, where we now host in-person and virtual events, along with partnered events, trips, and classes. For a full list of everything that we have confirmed, please go to our website, politics-prose.com. Before we get started today, I would like you to please silence your cell phones to avoid any disruptions during the event. And while we strongly encourage mask wearing during the events, we especially encourage that for the signing line. So if you'll be coming to get your book personalized, that'd be great. If you don't have a mask with you, we also have plenty available to give you. So when we get to the time for opening the floor to your questions, we've placed a microphone over here by this pillar. And please line up at the microphone so that everybody can hear your questions. We are recording today's event, and we'd really like to catch every question and answer. So following the Q&A, we'll have a signing line up here at this big table. If you haven't already purchased the book, we have plenty of copies behind our registers at the front of the store. So make sure to get one for yourself, for your friends, for your family, whoever. We'll also ask you to line up starting at the pillar for the signing line, and we'll come by to ask your name for personalization, so please have your books out and ready for us. Once the event is complete, we ask that you please fold up your chairs and lean them against one of these sturdy bookshelves just to help us clean up a bit. And so now, without further ado, tonight I am very excited to welcome Simran Jeet Singh, celebrating the release of The Light We Give, How Sikh Wisdom Can Transform Your Life. Dr. Simran Jeet Singh is Executive Director of the Aspen Institute's Program on Religion and Society. Recognized among Time Magazine's 16 People Fighting for a More Equal America, he's a Soros Equality Fellow with the Open Society Foundation's Senior Advisor on Equity and Inclusion for YSC Consulting, and a visiting professor at Union Seminary. Dr. Singh is a regular contributor to Time, CNN, and The Washington Post, a monthly columnist for Religion News Service, and the author of the best-selling children's book, Fauja Singh Keeps Going. Dr. Singh will be in conversation with Rabia Chaudry, an attorney and New York Times best-selling author of Adnan's Story, and author of the upcoming book, Fatty Fatty Boom Boom, a memoir about food, fat, and family. She's also the executive producer of HBO's 2019 The Case Against Adnan Syed, a 4-part Emmy-nominated docuseries about the murder conviction of her friend Adnan Syed. Also in conversation will be Wajahat Ali, a New York Times contributor, op-ed writer, public speaker, recovering attorney, and tired dad of 2 very adorable children. His work has appeared in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, The Guardian, and the New York Review of Books. So please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose Simran Jeet Singh, Rabia Chaudry, and Wajahat Ali.
Hello, everyone. How's everyone? Can you guys hear me? Thank you for that overwhelmingly enthusiastic response. That was awesome. I really appreciate it. Give it up for Simran. He just released a book. All right. Rabia's book is forthcoming, and I just want to say that I actually have 3 children, not 2. So just want to put it out there for my wife and my baby Khadija that she exists. Thank you all for joining us. The hour is going to go by really fast. Hopefully there's chairs. If not, thank you for standing in the back. We have a conversation today to talk about how to save America. But other than that, it's going to be very lighthearted. I want to start off with this question to both of you. When did you first know that you were not the protagonist of the American narrative? Simran.
That's an interesting way to ask the question, because I've thought about this a lot in terms of my own life, and even in writing this book. But I haven't really thought of myself as a protagonist or an antagonist. Like it's just never really occurred to me that I might fit into the American narrative. I feel like in many ways I've always been outside of it. And so part of my experience growing up here in the States, I was born and raised in Texas. And my father was the first turban Sikh to live in San Antonio. And my brothers and I were the first kids with turbans running around the streets of San Antonio.
Like, are you like the first?
The first, yeah, with turbans. And so you can sort of imagine, or maybe some of you can maybe imagine what that was like for us. I mean, it was early when people would start asking us questions, and it wasn't always malicious. Sometimes it was, but it was very clear to us that people had no idea what to make of us. Right? The questions from kids were, "Why do you wear that thing on your head?" Or "What language are you speaking?" And so it was from a very young age we had to learn not just how to answer those questions, but also reconcile in our own heads that there was something different about us. So I would say we were like 4, 5, 6 years old when it became very clear to us. How about you, Rabia?
So, first of all, congratulations, Simran. Everybody's got to get this book. You're not allowed to leave until you have it in your hands. I'm telling you right now. That's my mission here.
Rabia's like a dadi. She will like hunt you down.
It's going to be the auntie at the door. Show me the book and the receipt. No, look, it's interesting because it wasn't until like adulthood and I started seeing some brown representation in TV that I realized, oh, it was so normal not to have it growing up that it didn't even seem like something offensive. It was just like, well, that's just how America is. We're just kind of on the outside of it. It almost, and when, I mean, as I'm reading Simran's book and I connect with so many of the really terrible anecdotes, like, when like being called like Saddam's niece and all kinds of stuff like that, we've had terribly comments. Even in those moments, I remember thinking as a child, well, I mean, I guess I am an outsider, but not necessarily feeling like I should be upset about it, like it was just like that's. And we were just, I think that was the first time that I realized that there is this entire story that people believe about us and we have like literally no power in it. I think that was and I was an adult, but that was the first time I was really.
And that's the power of story. You mentioned the American story, because we grew up around the same time where our greatest representation was Apu, a 2D cartoon voiced by a white man, right? And I remember around that age, we're like, Apu, he's brown, this is amazing. Very stereotypical, but amazing. You don't see your at the age of 5 and 6 and 7, oftentimes people of color in this country, we're having this conversation in America right now. How young is too young to talk about race? These kids can't take it. We gotta ban books. America has banned 1,100 books in the past year, ladies and gentlemen, in the year 2022. But 5, 6, 7 is when that was the common age that I keep hearing that we first learn our place in America, right? Why is your skin color the color of poo? Well, why do you have that thing on your head, and so forth. And what also sometimes happens is when you're not part of the story, you learn to hate yourself, kind of implicitly. And I remember I mentioned in my book that when I was 6, I went home and I told Ummi, mother, I said, Ummi, you have to give me an American name. I'm born and raised in America. I'll let you keep the W, and this is the name I chose. Not William, not Walter. I chose Wilbur. All right, I know, yes. And
totally on brand.
Yeah, totally on brand. Amazing. Like, let me even get a bigger target. And the reason I chose Wilbur is because we were reading Charlotte's Web, and Wilbur was the pig that everyone loved. And my mother, like all Desi immigrant parents, operates only on blunt and very blunt. She's like, your name is Wajahat, go away. But I remember even a person like me who grew up in a very loving brown Muslim family, you kind of learn to sometimes hate yourself. Did you guys ever have those moments where you wished you were the hero. You wished you were mainstream. You wished you were average American, which is all doing a lot of heavy lifting for white.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of moments that come to mind immediately. I'll share one that I don't think I share in the book, but it's one that has hit hard for me recently, and it's really come up because it has to do with being a parent now. And I hadn't really thought about how I had thought about my parents growing up. And it was a very loving home, very close to my parents and my siblings. But about 2 years ago, I was going through TSA security. And for those of you who go through this experience, you'll understand that when you walk through with a turban or a hijab, the standard protocol from our own government is secondary screening. It's racial profiling. And like you were saying, over the years, since 9/11, you kind of get used to it. I don't get so bothered by it anymore. But about 2 or 3 years ago, I was walking with my daughters, and my older daughter, for the first time, she was old enough to understand what was happening. Or she didn't understand, but she had a question. Because I walked through holding her hand, and my wife was holding our other daughter, who was a baby. And my daughter said, well, why are you going away? Did you do something wrong? And this had never really bothered me over the years. Totally used to it. But it was in that moment where I started to recognize that my own government was teaching my daughters that there's something to be ashamed of about me and about who we are. And I mean, I'm not a dramatic person. I'm not an overly expressive person, but the next 24 hours were brutal. Like, I could not sleep that night. I could not do anything on that flight. It was just, what do I do about this experience? And part of what was coming up for me was this memory that I had of being embarrassed of my own parents. I mean, my dad wore a turban too. It's not like he was that different, but their accents, right? Some of the cultural differences because they came as immigrants. Like, it was very real for me, although I always loved them and still do. I also had this concern of, well, what will my friends think when they notice that my parents talk this way or eat this way or do this other thing? And so, yeah, it is something that has felt really real for me over the last few years.
So I mean, I don't have a profound anecdote to share about like the first memory I have of basically wishing I was white. But and I write about this in my upcoming book. But I was in 5th grade, and there was a little boy named Jonathan Whitney, who the entire school had a crush on. And
including Rabia?
I pretended not to. And that's when I really started noticing like who the pretty girls were, and how all the pretty girls were blonde and blue-eyed and had pink cheeks. And when I ran, I turned blue and they turned pink. And these kinds of differences. And that was the first time I remember thinking, God, I wish I was white. But this continued over the years when, especially in school related stuff, like when we'd have Christmas concerts and stuff, and I ended up playing, like, me and my sister would play like 2 of the 3 wise men all the time because we're brown, and played them very well, by the way. So immigrants get the job done. So, but I wish I wish I could just kind of stay in this world. Everybody's celebrating Christmas, and like this is the overwhelming culture, right? Like, and I remember one year I convinced my mom to let me just get like 3 stockings. She's like, I don't know why these socks are hanging here, but fine, just let it happen. And so yeah, there were a lot of those kinds of moments. Yeah.
But what's interesting is each of us, in our own ways, even though we grew up in what is predominantly what mainstream is synonymous for white, born and raised in this country to immigrant parents, somehow along the way we resisted, and we held on to those traditions. And we're very openly brown-skinned, very openly Desi, very openly Sikh and Muslim. You're a Muslim who wears hijab. And there was a decision made to be an active participant in pushing back, right? And what was that pivot point where you said, okay, I can either assimilate into this melting pot where I'll become, I don't want to melt into anything. I don't know about you guys, right? I like my corporeal form, right? But like, you that's a decision that makes, like, I could change my name to like, what would be your American white name? Wilbur, right? You'd be William, you'd be like, I don't know. Bobby, right? And I'll be Pinky. But you're like, no, we will represent. And oftentimes, even though we're the token brown, the token Sikh, the token Muslim, we'll step up. And we will make the decision to be the cultural ambassadors of all of our people. That's a choice. And when and how did you make that choice?
It's a great question, because in many ways you might look at me, and a reporter I was talking to today actually made this assumption, right? He said, well, you were born in a Sikh family, so this is just what you inherit, right? Like, and yes, there's some truth to that, right? Like, I live the tradition that my parents gave me, but it's actually a choice every single day, right? Every day I choose to wear the turban, and I intentionally wrap it around my head. So it's not like this is just some passive acceptance of who I am because I was born a certain way. And I think for me, I was raised in this tradition, and it was transmitted to me very intentionally. And what I describe in the book is that my engagement with it, when I really began to appreciate it, was after 9/11. And I know this to be true for many of my Sikh friends, where the terrorist attacks hit, we are targeted. Our communities become America's enemy. I mean, we fit the exact profile of who should be seen as a threat. And all of a sudden, the racism that I had felt before, I couldn't turn away from it. I couldn't ignore it anymore, because people I knew were getting attacked and killed. I mean, literally. And so, on the one hand, I felt this obligation, and I think many of us did, to push back and protect ourselves, and to ensure we did whatever we could to survive. And then, a few months and a few years pass and things settle, and then you start asking yourself internally, or at least I did, well, why do I choose to live this way? What's the value? What's the purpose? Is this really worth the trouble? I mean, I was in college then. Yeah, it's a real cost, and you don't have to. And so as a college student, I really started delving into the why. And the more I studied a bunch of different religions. I'm now a scholar of religion. The more I studied other traditions and my own, the more I started to appreciate some of the principles of Sikh philosophy as having real practical answers for some of the most pressing questions in our lives. And that to me was the moment where I said, you know what, it's not just a superficial pride of, hey, I come from another place and I can resist the norm of America. I mean, that was certainly there, and it's always been this sort of almost rebellious streak. That's part of our tradition too. But it was deeper than that as I started to study and say, you know what, there's something really substantive here that I love and I want to hold on to. And it came through this process of delving deep within the tradition.
Yeah, I have a feeling that a lot of South Asian Americans of Muslim background, or maybe like Muslim Americans and Sikh Americans, I think after 9/11, like that forced us to like really examine, is what we are being told about ourselves true? That's how it happened for me. I said, okay, we've got these people who are claiming that Islam says X, Y, and Z, and these are people who identify as Muslim, and I got to figure out like what part of this is real and what part of it is not. And during 9/11, I was in law school. I was a young adult, and at the same time, I was also having a lot of issues in the local Muslim community with like how women were being treated at the mosque. So I was having all kinds of crises. I was like,
treated great.
They're treated great, yeah.
No,
we get our own wall.
We got work to do, guys.
We get our own border wall, yeah. And so I was like, if the worst parts, I mean, if my worst experiences being a Muslim are coming from like within the Islamic tradition, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can stay in it. And I probably spent 4 or 5 years just really bypassing gatekeepers. I'm sorry, but a lot of religious leaders are male gatekeepers who like want to interpret tradition the way they want to interpret it in order to keep a certain, status quo. And I realized so much of what like we're being told about women, about non-Muslims, about all these things actually is not what the text says. It's not even in the spirit of the religion, right? Like, so once I was able to get past all that, is when I like consciously said that this faith answers all my questions, and I'm leaning into it. And I didn't start wearing hijab until I was 30. We didn't grow up in a household that, we were Pakistani Punjabis, and it's not that common really, even in Pakistan. So I started wearing hijab when I was 30,
So, I mean, I want to talk about 9/11, and I want to talk about religion, but let's just focus on 9/11, because for all of us, it was a turning point. around the same age. We're the generation that saw the two towers fall. And we're the generation that had to bear the cost of it. There were targets on our back, right? I remember the hate mail that I received. I was at UC Berkeley, a senior, and my roommate decided to put my email on the UC Berkeley MSA list, FML, as the kids say. And that day, I got the email, go back to where you came from, and you effing Muslims. And I'm like, I'm a 20-year-old undeclared senior at UC Berkeley, born to Pakistani Muslim parents. What? These are 19 foreign hijackers. But bigots, ladies and gentlemen, aren't nuanced, if you've noticed. And the first hate crime, people forget this, after 9/11 was not against a Muslim. It was against Balbir Singh, a Sikh immigrant gas station owner in Mesa, Arizona, because the white supremacists said, I want to get revenge for the two towers, and I'm going to take my anger out on you. Sikh Indian gas station owner in Mesa, Arizona, who wore a turban and had a beard. Bigots aren't nuanced. But I remember in that moment, that post 9/11 climate, we were talking about this in the green room, a lot of folks were just trying to save themselves. And so there were some Arab Christian friends who were like, I'm not Muslim, it's those Muslims. And like some Sikhs were like, it's those Muslims, it's not us. And then some Muslims here were like, it's not us, it's the bad Muslims. But we learned real quick it didn't matter. And just taking me through that moment where you had that realization that we actually can't throw each other under the bus. If you can take the DeLorean back to October 2001.
Yeah, one of the really confusing elements of experiencing the process of racialization, of living through the experience of people starting to look at you differently, is exactly what Rabia was describing before. It's the gap between how other people see you versus how you see yourself. And up until this point, like I was saying before, it was completely fine for me to ignore when people came after us and be like, that's just your perception, that's your problem, you deal with it. And after 9/11, especially after Balbir Singh Chaudry was killed, September 15th it was, it became clear to us that we had to be more active in how we responded and more thoughtful about this response. And I'll share a couple of things here. In the few days and weeks that followed 9/11, so immediately, the day of 9/11, my mom picks us up from school, we go home, we lock the doors, nobody says anything, and we turn the TV on, and we just watch the news, trying to understand what's happening to our country. Like pretty much every other American in this country. And then in the evenings, we would get on these conference calls. And, my brothers and I are kids, we're listening, but community leaders from around the country are having conversations. And they're sharing what are the attacks that we've experienced in our community, who's been hurt, how are they doing? And so we would get these reports. Some of the people who are on these calls and led those calls are actually in this room. We'd get these reports, and then afterwards, we would talk about, well, what do we do? And I remember as an 18-year-old at the time, listening to these conversations, and it was actually, as I was describing, when did I really start to recognize something powerful about this tradition and this worldview? It was in those conversations, because it was exactly this question of, well, what really is the right thing to do in this situation? And it's easier for me to understand this now, right? Like the easy response, and as a parent, the most intuitive response is, I just want safety for myself and my kids, whatever that takes. If people are coming to kill us, I'll say anything, like literally anything. I mean, I would do that right now for my own girls, right? Like it's very obvious to a parent, but being on these calls with these leaders who are saying, yeah, sure, we could do that, but that's not the right thing to do, to deflect hate to someone else. And what I learned in that moment was a couple of things. It's not just about ethics. There was also strategy, right? It wasn't just the right thing to do. It was also this very clear recognition that saving ourselves is actually not going to save us all. Yeah. And if you deflect hate, it's just going to come back and get you later. And so to me, this was the real moment. And people on those calls would share reflections from our tradition in terms of how our leaders and Sikh heroes in history would really make the tough decisions and take on pain in the service of justice. And so it wasn't it wasn't this like overly dramatized like martyrdom perspective. It wasn't like we need to go out and risk our lives to save other people. It wasn't like that. It was just like, what does our tradition teach us? What are the right things? What are the principles we're trying to live by? And let's just do that, even if it makes things harder for us in the short term. So I love that. It's been really powerful for me.
Well, before Rabia responds, do you ever sit there and go like, freaking Muslims? It's a safe space. We're not recording it.
Nobody's feeding me.
No, you're like, Hindu nationalism. You're like, you want to be like, hey, it's Sikhs here, we're okay. You know, you ever sit there and just get frustrated, or do these values help you overcome it? Because I know, I'm just keeping it real. Let's do real talk here. I know some people, they're just like, I'm going to throw you under the bus. You've made my life terrible. They just attacked a Gurdwara because they want to attack Muslims. And so my initial response is, I'm not those Muslims. Let's go get those Muslims. Right? That's that, like you said, that's the initial human response to save yourself.
Let me answer that. Like, I'll be honest and say, growing up, I didn't actually know Muslims. My babysitter, I had one babysitter who was Muslim. She was the only Muslim I knew. She was great, except she made us eat spaghetti with ketchup, which scarring.
That is not in our tradition.
Not in the Quran. Yeah. Not in the Quran.
We disown that Muslim who made you do that. I apologize. On behalf of all my people for that scarring event.
So the confusing thing about the racialization, right, of people saying, of people starting to see me as Muslim, was I actually didn't know any. Right, this is the funny thing about race and racism, which is it doesn't matter how you see yourself, it matters how people perceive you. And so here I am, an 18-year-old, I don't know Muslims, and I'm being perceived as one, and I don't know how to get out of this box. And to your question, I think early on, I had very simplistic understandings in the way that most of us are raised in this country to have of who other people are. Right, I had a very simplistic view of Hindus. I didn't know any. Or many at least. I had a very simplistic view of Muslims. Like they were all just people in a box that all did the same things and thought of the world in the same way. And then I started meeting people. And that completely changed my perspective. And now I recognize that there are people of every background who do these horrible things, including of the Sikh background, right? And so it's, I guess part of the point is in my own maturation and evolution, learning to recognize that it's not the religion that causes this violence. And that's really helped me sort of move beyond the vulnerability we all have of stereotypes, right? We all make assumptions about people, especially when we don't know them. So actually getting to know people has protected me from that, at least to whatever degree I've been able to.
Robbie, I want to bring you and Simran in when it comes to, can we talk about religion?
Yeah.
Is it okay? It was like a very pregnant pause that made me very nervous right now. Both of you have leaned in to your religious identity, but it's not just as an identity, but as a way of life, values, philosophy. In fact, your book is not just the light we give, how Sikh wisdom can transform your life. And these religions of ours, as you know, are stereotyped, maligned, misunderstood, and oftentimes used by bigots to attack our communities. And as you were saying, Rabia, and even you, Simran, it took 9/11, this moment of crisis, for you guys to actually go back into your religion and say, oh, there's a better way to respond to this hate. I won't meet hate with hate. I won't meet anger with anger. In fact, when I actually go reinvestigate my religion, it gives me models to be a better person. And actually, there's values here that can help America and humanity. And I want to ask you about that, Rabia, that choice you made to lean in and actually share your religious values. Because even in the book, Anand's story, even though it's about the criminal justice system, you actually made a very deliberate decision before each chapter to sometimes just put a verse of the Quran or a hadith, a saying of the Prophet Muhammad. What is it about Islam for you, and then I want to talk to you about your book and Sikhism in particular, that you think can not only benefit you, but actually benefit America in this moment of multiple crises?
Are you asking how Islam can save America?
Well, basically we have
that's what it sounded like.
We basically have a competition of who can convert more people to Sikhism or Islam. So this is just me trying to ante up the. I'm just kidding. But I mean, it's a choice that you made, and the answer could be, I don't think it can help. Like I've just noticed, this is an observation I've made about both of you.
Look, I have spent much of my adult life doing like a lot of some superficial, but a lot of very deep interfaith work. And what I found is like, when you think about like, who are my people? Who am I deeply connected to? It's always people of faith, but not people of the same faith. Like the people who are closest to me are people who all have some kind of a spiritual or faith belief system that guides them. And like, that's what I connect to and I honestly see like this, I just see like one common thread throughout all of this. I mean, whether it's I have very close Hindu friends, Buddhist friends, Sikh friends. I mean, and I see like literally, I just see the same values lived throughout all of this. So I might get excommunicated for this, but I truly do believe there are many paths to one God. And so there are plenty of times, listen, if you follow me on Twitter, I don't always respond very graciously to hate and difficult situations. But on a deeper level, I again and again and again turn to the stories of my religion to teach me what is the proper community response to something. And I'll give you one example, a very simple example. There's a tradition of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Prophet Muhammad, and the traditions of the Prophet are called hadith. They're a collection of sayings and things he did about the question of engagement. And as somebody who's done a lot of advocacy work, it's like, when do you engage people? When do you not engage? Do you engage hate groups? Do you not? Like, there's a lot of red lines that advocates also like draw and like you cannot cross these things. And it's a very simple tradition that you engage until and unless you are abused. If you are physically or verbally abused, you say salam, peace, and walk away. But unless, then you should continue to engage. Like, that's what we are encouraged. So, when I'm like grappling with like these tough questions, and it's hard to be in a space where everybody has everybody's a pundit, everybody's a guru, everybody has their own ideas. You can get, kicked out of your own community if you like do the wrong thing, as we know. And I realized that I cannot take my cues from like just, like social media advocates, basically social justice warriors on their computers. And so, for me, like, I have to go back to my faith again and again. And the reason I started every chapter in the book of Adnan story with something from the Muslim faith tradition is because I need people to understand how we think. One of the most instructive things that I've learned is in doing my interfaith work is just being quiet and listening to what other people believe about themselves, right? Like, it's crazy to me that people are always saying, well, your religion believes this. And how do you know what my religion believes? Like, I'm the one practicing it, right? So it's like, I just really think that the best way to like, I mean, people really need to be able to quiet and listen to what people have to say about their own selves, what their own beliefs are.
And Simran, you've spent your life actually investing in this concept of religious pluralism in America, right? You, scholar of religion, this is funny, teaches Islam, right? And I'm sure a bunch of Sikh folks are like, why, bro? Why are you doing this? Your job at Aspen right now, and the book. And specifically, again, I want to get back to the book, is you had this deliberate choice to write this American story, and you said the light we give, how Sikh wisdom can transform your life. And specifically, if you can share, and this is why you have to read the book, but I want to give a teaser to the audience, about Sikhism, which many people do not understand. I mean, is it Sikh? Is it Sikh? How do you pronounce it? Sikh. Yeah. What is it about Guru Nanak and the teachings of Sikhism that you think at this moment in America can really help individuals who are atheists, who are searching, who might be Muslim, who might be Christian, but you're like, you know what? You can benefit from this wisdom that I've been lucky to receive from my ancestors, and I think this can heal some of the divides.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's growing up, I would always hear people talk about Sikh principles as being universal and timeless. And I would hear that, and over the years I started to roll my eyes and be like, you just want to be able to say that this is perfection. And I didn't really understand what was meant by these terms, universal and timeless, until I really started delving into the tradition. And part of what I have discovered in my study of Sikhism and in my attempts to practice it is that it's actually really simple. And the simplicity, I think, makes it actionable and practical. And there are many lessons that I've taken away that have given me immense joy in a world that feels really difficult. And that's why I wanted to share it with, I mean, that's it really, right? As I look around and see people suffering, and I feel the privilege of having access to this deep well of wisdom that's not my own. been given it as a gift, I want to share it. And so there are many things I could share in response. There are many ideas in the book, but the one that I would say is really, that I've been thinking about a lot the last few weeks, is the teaching around ego. And in the Sikh tradition and in many spiritual traditions, I teach Buddhism now. In Buddhism, this is a common teaching. In Islam, it's a common teaching where we talk about nafs, right? Like, ego is such a source of human suffering individually, right? We all suffer because of ego. This is what Sikhism teaches us too. And what we learn from Guru Nanak and his teachings is there's a way out of that. And I'm not sitting here claiming that I've perfected it or that I'm some sort of prophet or guru, but like, it's given me immense happiness. And there are 3 principles in our tradition, which again, I find to be universal. And I think they're universal in the sense that we find them in other traditions, right? So the foundation is ikonkar, a perspective of interconnectedness, what in Buddhism we might call interdependence. In Islam, you call it tawheed or wahadat al-wujud, right? Like, it's the oneness, the interconnectedness. And part of what I'm noticing in this country right now and around the world is the way we think about identity and our constant obsession with identity is just reinforcing our ego over and over again, right? I'm this and you're that. Race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, even in our conversations around diversity and inclusion, even those are just perpetuating this sense of who I am in opposition to you. And what the interconnection offers us is we can think of who we are in relation to one another, right? If we start with this simple concept of what do we share at our core? What is that one? What is ikonkar? What is the light, right? That's a metaphor that we also see in many traditions. If we start from that place, then Guru Nanak says every aspect of difference becomes an expression of the oneness. Like, that's beauty. You're not scared of the difference anymore. You love it. You're celebrating it. You're cherishing it. And so this to me is step 1 that Guru Nanak teaches us, and there are several other elements that we can build on from there, but I'll share one more, which I've also been thinking about quite a lot recently, and it comes closer to the end of the book, but it's this, if you follow the thread of this idea that we're all interconnected, right? That is a thought. If you can learn to feel that in your everyday life, then that's love. You can learn to take the transient moments of love, which is the best of human experience, and make those constant experiences of life, right? You're constantly seeing the beauty, or what we call in Punjabi, it's mithas, sweetness, right? The sweetness of life is always there. And then the expression of that, of your love, if you love someone, you serve them. It's action, right? You're moved into action. And it's not about you. It's egoless. It's selfless. It's about the people you love. And what I think is really powerful is that the practice of selfless love erases your ego. That's what the Sikh tradition teaches us. And if you can learn to erase your ego, even just diminish it a little bit, then you're happier, right? And you can hold on to that for much longer. So this is something that is, I think, a really subtle shift that we can all make. You don't have to convert to Islam or Sikhism. You don't have to
Repeat
convert.
after me.
But they're just little principles that you can shift, that instead of starting from a place of difference, you start from a place of oneness. Instead of operating out of fear or anger or ego, you operate out of love. And then your entire experience of this world is just different. It's sweet all the time. That's what Guru Nanak offers us, and I think we can all have that.
That's very beautiful. And before we open up to Q&A, I want to ask one more question. But you know, this whole concept of erasing the ego, it's very similar to Sufism and Islam. Tazkiyat al-nafs, work on your nafs, work on your ego. And once you conquer your ego, then you will be in service to God and you can be selfless. And that's where you find the spiritual highs of life, right? And the interconnectedness, I think, is very important, very telling, especially as if you've all seen the videos of Europe burning. Right now, 104-degree temperature in England, 114-degree temperature in Italy. And we are all connected to each other on this planet. When the sea levels rise, you get climate change refugees. You're going to get resources and land that are going to die. You're going to get animals who are going to suffer. This is going to impact all of us. Contrary to what Herschel Walker said, there's not good air or clean air that goes to China and comes back. He actually said that. May he lose the Senate race in Georgia. I apologize if I'm being too political. But it just shows you right now, climate change and the pandemic, for those who thought that we were not close and connected, this has flattened all of us, but has flattened us unequally. Those with privilege seem to get an upper hand on this. But speaking about the interconnectedness, and we talked about this in the green room, one would assume that Desis, that's what we call ourselves, those who come from the motherland, South Asians, would be able to get along and say, okay, there's these differences, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, Pakistani, Indian, but at the core of it, the bigots don't care. We still eat dal chawal, we eat roti. There's more similarities than differences. And I was telling Simran, when I grew up and how I grew up, my parents couldn't care less that someone was Sikh or Hindu. Most of my friends growing up were like Sikh, Hindu, or Catholic, right? We used to go over to their house. Simran Sandhu's dadi used to make chapati, paratha, and roti, and like gobi and like palak. Google it; it's delicious. They used to come to our house. No one ever said anything. My parents never said, "Why'd you bring a Sikh to a home or a Hindu to a home?" It was like Desi, great, we trust them, same values. Go eat roti. The only time I experienced these differences, right, was when I was my freshman year of UC Berkeley, where I'm walking with my friend Gaurav, who carpooled with me for years, Indian Hindu, and there's another friend, Vishal, who comes, and he says, how long have you guys known each other? We're like, for years. We used to go over to each other's houses. And he goes, wow, I brought home a Muslim once, and my nani said, why'd you bring a warmonger to the house? And I'm like, damn. And it was during that time, 98, 99, 2000, with the rise of Hindu nationalism, that I saw that imported, or rather exported to America. And you're seeing that impact us right now. Completely foreign to me then, completely foreign to me now. So with that being said, and that's a real problem right now in India that is affecting our communities, we've seen that being exported here. Any message, any lesson of how we can build the ties with our own communities where religion and tribalism and ethnicity are being literally driven by some folks to drive us apart? Simple question before we open up to Q&A.
I think the only thing that matters is whether you're Punjabi or not. That's the only divide that matters.
I like how literally Simran did this poetic expression of oneness, and the Punjabi tribalism just came out of Rabia and crushed it. But in all seriousness, yes.
No, this is for Simran.
Yeah, I'll share a story that I share in the book, which is actually kind of embarrassing in retrospect. And it's, so I moved from Texas, didn't really know many Sikhs growing up, lived in Boston, not many Sikhs there either. And then I moved to New York, and I was so excited because finally I would have Sikh friends. Yeah. And there were guys who were my age, who same interests, basketball, we played basketball together. Other sports, that was pretty much our only interest. It was just basketball.
Same with Muslims, man.
so we played
Chai, Ami's Khana, chasing girls that we couldn't get.
Mangoes.
TV, basketball.
Basketball, yeah, exactly. So I just had this expectation that I would finally be in this place where I would have people who were just like me and who understood me. And I hung out with these guys for a couple of weeks, good guys, like fine people, and we played a lot of basketball together, watched a lot of basketball together. But then I was like, these are not my people. Like I get along better with my friends from college who are not Sikh. I share values more closely with people who are not Sikh that I know than these people who I'm hanging out with. And it just kind of blew my mind. And it's embarrassing in retrospect because of course that's not how the world works or how humans work, right? We find connection across other kinds of differences, and just because we come from the same place or have the same last names or whatever it is doesn't mean that we're the same, right? That's what I was expecting. I wanted sameness for whatever reason. And so part of my lesson in that experience, it was disappointing at first, and then I came to understand and appreciate that actually looking for sameness only erases what is actually beautiful about the world. And And I started to recognize when other people would start putting stereotypes on me about who they thought I was, that's exactly what I had been doing about my own community. And so it was just this revelatory moment of like, we all do this. We all have this proclivity to say, you look this way, or you come from this place, and you are this or that or whatever, and therefore I can categorize you. And so to me, it's just the humility of understanding that whatever it is that you think you know about other people, you actually have to get to know. And I think that's, to me at least, that's the only way, the curiosity, the humility, the openness that gets us to a place beyond tribalism.
And I think it's the awareness and the intention that then leads to the action, and the choice that you make to reach out and befriend people who are different. And we could all enjoy roti and paratha, I think. I think we can all agree on that. I hope so, at least, or else it's over for America. If you haven't had paratha, you haven't lived life. Go get a paratha right now after this this conversation. But first, get Simran's book. There is about 13, 14 minutes left for Q&A. I want to open it up. Just come right there to that microphone and ask Simran and Rabia any questions you might have. Don't all rush at once, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, let me ask a question before, as you guys mull. You can ask a question.
I have lots of questions. I mean, but I'll ask just one, which, you know, you're a scholar of religion, but in the political space, you're a pretty progressive person. And one thing I've struggled with a little bit, especially in DC, and I worked in national security policy for 6-7 years, is being a religious progressive person, because it often feels like those spaces, like, you know, there's the other side of the political spectrum has like claimed that space, you know, claimed religion for themselves. So, and frankly, sometimes it feels like there isn't space for religion on the progressive end of the spectrum. Like, we're just like silly woo-woo people. So has that ever like been an issue for you, and how have you navigated that?
Yeah, it was a big surprise to me when it first came up, because I mean, remember, I'm growing up in Texas, and the assumptions that I had about what people were assuming about me was that I was the things they said to me, right? Terrorist, violent, misogynistic, whatever they thought Muslims were, right? Like, that was their assumption. And so that's what I came to expect of people. And then I moved to Boston. My wife now, we were dating then, she was in medical school, and her best friend came out to her as gay. And he comes from a pretty traditional Catholic family. And he begged her. He was like, please don't tell Sim. Like, don't tell him. And she was like, why not? And he was like, well, he's religious. And I can tell he's religious because he's like super religious. Like, look, he wears a turban. And she assured him that I'm not like that. But it was the first time to me that I came to understand this exact thing you're describing, where people, because I was openly religious, would come to have some expectations about my political beliefs or my social beliefs, and that I was socially or politically conservative. And that was, it was like a slap in the face. Like, I was really embarrassed that he would assume that of me, and it was the first time I really thought. I came to understand that people might have these assumptions about me. And so it became important to me, and I'll say one other thing here. It became important to me to be more open about who I am, not just to sort of push back against people's stereotypes that I didn't even know existed about me, but also as a way of pulling myself out of any kind of stereotypes that I find myself in. What I'm trying to say is, so often when people are stereotyping you, they're flattening you to one thing, right? Like, I think often in this country now, Sikhs are only talked about in the context of a hate crime, and so we're seen as victims and people feel sorry for us. And that, I don't like that. Like, I don't want us to be, I don't see our community as victims. I don't see myself as a victim. And I think the only way to really push back against that is to show the fullness of our humanity. So that's why I talk about my politics and my love for sports and the food I mean, just being a normal human, right? Like, that's who we are, and I just try and present that whenever I can.
I have one more question. I should just get up at that mic. Is that okay? Oh, good. We do have a question, but I'm just going to... and that is this. As you kind of like went back to your faith tradition to like draw inspiration, knowledge, guidance, were there things that you encountered that you found either problematic or contradictory to your like kind of values as a human being? And then if so, like what, could you give an example and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I'll share one that was very confusing for me. And it was when I was younger, my friends in Texas would often be like, well, we want you to be saved because we love you, and so please convert. And they started then asking me, well, if you don't believe in that, then what do you believe in for afterlife? And it was really confusing to me because I couldn't find a good answer. Like I couldn't find a compelling, clear answer in the way that Christianity has, and that most of my friends were Christian. And I started questioning, well, I would start reading about other religion and be like, well, is Sikh philosophy somehow deficient because there is no clear answer? Like, why can I not get an answer about afterlife? And it wasn't for years of pushing and asking pretty much everyone I knew, like, what do I do with this question? So it was a really important experience for me to go through that and actually come to understand that I don't have to ask the same questions, and my tradition doesn't care about the same questions necessarily in the same way that others do. And that was my first experience of like, well, maybe I'm looking at my own faith through the lens of Christianity as opposed to what it is meant for itself.
We have 7 minutes left, and I want to make sure I get all the questions. So let's do 2 questions at a time. Hannah, go for it. Go first.
Okay. Thank you for that lovely conversation. My question is to follow up to what you said about your daughter in TSA and just how, I mean, I know she's young, but as a mom of teens and seeing how angry people are on social media and how polarized everyone is and how so much activism is linked to outrage, how do you reconcile that with what you're trying to teach your daughter and, you know, the oneness and the connectedness? And what advice do you have for a parent with angry teenagers?
I was actually going to ask that, so thank you. Excellent question, and let's have one more.
Sat Shri Akal, so good to see you. My question is related, but in a kind of odd way. But I really resonate with your message of radical empathy, radical love, radical optimism. And I'm curious for you, I know for me, it comes from Sikhi in a lot of ways, but how do you practice that on a daily basis when we're constantly bombarded with news that feels so heavy and so disheartening at times?
Pretty similar thread there.
Yeah, I'll share with you an anecdote from when I was a kid that really formed me. And I have many examples like this, but the first one that comes to mind is in those immediate days after 9/11, where we were getting death threats starting the day of. Our house was shut down, as I described to you. And again, like, we're sitting here twice attacked, right? We're as Americans and as Sikhs. And I was feeling pretty down, right? The murder of Balbir Singh Chaudry, as we heard, I mean, it was intense and it was rough and it was hard to see anything positive coming forward. And I remember my parents saying, "We're so lucky." I was like, what is, I don't think you understand what's going on right now. And what is there to feel lucky about? And they said, well, notice our neighbors have brought over meals, your coaches are calling, your friends have come by, your teammates, your teacher. I mean, they were like, haven't you noticed that? And I was like, yeah, sure, but like, there's other stuff going on. And the lesson in this moment, and this is a lesson that my parents constantly tried to instill in us in the tough moments, was you always have to recognize the good around you. And the good is always there. And we have to make it a choice to see it. And we're socialized, but we're also wired to focus on the negative, right? What is going to help us essentially like survive, right? What is that basic instinct? But then what is our practice, our daily practice for the gifts that we have, for the goodness around us? And I think for me, like a really simple practice that I found that changed my life in high school was gratitude. It's nothing super profound or innovative, but it's just like counting your blessings at the end of each day. And what I noticed was I would do 3 every night. What am I grateful for? And it could be something huge and exciting. It could be something tiny. What I noticed was as I did that every night, then I started noticing during the day, oh, I'm going to write that down later. And then the more I did that, the more I was noticing. And that was a feeling of both the sort of connection and remembrance that we're taught in our tradition, but then also like, oh, there is goodness around us. I just forgot to notice it.
We have 3 minutes left. Let's take one more question. If we have time, I'll get you.
Hi, it's been wonderful hearing you speak, so thank you. I just wanted to mention I'm a Simran also, so I appreciate you. So I know you mentioned you're a religious scholar, so I just wanted to ask what significant morals, ideas, advice has come through to you across different religions, and what themes have come across through all of them in your studies?
Very simple question for the last 2 minutes.
Yeah.
A good question.
Yeah, there's so much running through my head right now. I think to me, one key aspect that comes out of every tradition that I've studied, and in my own practice too of Sikhism, is in the Bible it's described as faith without works is dead. And the point is, you can think anything, you can believe anything, you can know everything. Doesn't matter if you're not doing anything about it. So until you build that into your daily practice, until it becomes part of your character, it doesn't matter. In every tradition, Islam, maybe more than any tradition, talks about this, that like it's what you do in this world that matters. Guru Nanak has this really cool, we have this anecdote about Guru Nanak where he meets these ascetics who are really spiritually accomplished. Like sadhus, we call them. Like they're incredibly spiritual. And he goes and talks to them, and the outcome of his conversation is like, who cares? Like, I respect your spirituality. What difference are you making in the world? And so to me, if you are truly spiritual, then your spirituality, your love for the world will translate into action because you love the world, right? That's what we are taught, and it's something that I see in every tradition.
The final question with the minute I have, and for those who didn't get to ask a question, don't worry, Simran's going to be right here signing the book. The book is The Light We Give that you have to buy. Auntie Rabia is making sure who purchased a copy. But, you know, I went to an all-boys Jesuit Catholic high school, and similarly, the Jesuits taught me that it's faith through service, meant for others. And specifically, in this specific time, many people are saying, what's the point? Climate change, income inequality, white supremacy, rise of fascism, rise of hate, like it's all coming at once. And the final question I have for both of you is, what is giving you hope during these hopeless times?
I'll go first.
Go first.
I always, whenever I think about that, and believe me, I think we all go through that kind of spiral every so often when you're on Twitter and then you get off. And but there is a tradition, a hadith that I think about all the time, which is that, you know, Muslims. By the way, there's a Muslim Jannah, so you're welcome. You can come to our heaven if you're not sure. But there's a tradition in which, you know, in the Islamic faith, that the world is going to come to an end at some point, and that's the end times, and that in order for that to happen, there'll be an angel who blows a trumpet. And so the tradition says that if you are planting a seed or planting a plant, I can't remember which one, but if you're planting something, and the angel blows the trumpet, that it's the end of the world, finish planting. Like, finish your work. That's what we're going to be judged by. And I think about that all the time, and I'm like, all right, keep moving ahead, keep planting. And in the end, you know, only God knows what the fruit of that will bring.
Yeah, one of the teachings that's giving me a lot of hope right now is the acceptance of imperfection. Because I think so much of our culture right now is, we will not be happy until we are perfect, until we solve all the problems of our world. And the humility to be able to step back and say, this is not, I am imperfect, and humans are imperfect, and the world is going to be imperfect, and that's okay. And we will just do the best we can. There's a lot of teaching around this in Sikh philosophy, but I think, again, it goes back to the core of ego, right? Like, you are not here to fix everything, and so take that pressure off of yourself and find the calm within the storm, and then try and resolve what you can while you're here. So very much along the line of what you're describing.
Thank you all for coming. I want to thank the authors. We have Hannah Khan here, is another best-selling YA author who, Curious George Meets Islam. We got Rabia Chaudry, Anand's story, which is here, and then Fatty Fatty Boom Boom is coming out, which is excellent, which I was lucky enough to blurb. And you're here for Simran Jeet Singh's book, The Light We Give, How Sikh Wisdom Can Transform Your Life. He's signing it right now. Thank you all for coming. Buy a book, spread the word. Huh?
Wajahat's book. Yes.
If you have money left over, buy my book. But right now, buy his book first. The book is called Go Back to Where You Came From and Other Helpful Recommendations on How to Become American. But right now, buy The Light We Give. And then if you have some money left